Welcome to the session. My name is Shaveen Kumar. I'm a developer technology engineer at NVIDIA. And today, I'll be talking to you about how you can get your best gaming moments captured. So some of the things that we're going to be covering today are, we'll be looking at what exactly Geforce Experience is. We'll be looking at a feature in Geforce Experience called Shadowplay Highlights. We will go through some workflow and scenarios using highlights. And finally, towards the end, we will look at some sample code, samples that show you how you can integrate highlights into your existing game projects. So let's get started. So what is Geforce Experience? Geforce Experience is your gateway to great PC gaming. It is a platform that informs you and keeps you up to date with the latest drivers for your graphics card. It suggests and applies optimal game settings for your installed games based on your system configuration. It also comes with Ansel and Shadowplay. Ansel technology allows a player to capture in-game shots in super high resolution and apply filters to them and capture them from various different angles and view them in 360 degrees, etc. Today, we'll be talking a little bit more about Shadowplay. 3 years ago, we introduced Shadowplay. Shadowplay has become the industry standard for high-quality video capture on PC. Shadowplay makes it easy to capture video with a simple hotkey, and it runs in the background with no performance impact. It has really been growing with 200 million videos per year and 2 times year-over-year growth. But at the end of the day, it is all about the users. We need to put the users' needs first. NVIDIA provides mechanisms for users to manually capture gameplay with hotkey combinations. But when the user is caught up in the action and something worth saving happens, he doesn't always think to save it, nor is it always convenient to do so. He can record the whole gaming session, but he still requires to scrub through the video to find the good stuff. It would be ideal if the right moments are laid out for the user at the right time. And that's where Shadowplay Highlights comes in. Shadowplay Highlights builds on top of existing Shadowplay technology to give gamers a way to capture moments based on game events. It leverages the overlay tool, making it easy to clip and share content on social media. Shadowplay Highlights is currently available in Lawbreakers, Paragon, PlayerUnknown Battlegrounds, and several games that are currently in development. Now, let's look at some footage from PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, which makes use of Shadowplay Highlights.
Nice. Yeah, baby. Nice.
Breaking it down, Highlights allows the user to turn the entire feature, associated notifications, and each type of highlight per game on and off. It leverages the rich video and screenshot features baked into Geforce Experience for rich content without a hit to game performance. Highlights uses its in-game overlay to present a summary of clips for review after the game. It also provides options for sharing on social media. Now let's look at a scenario with a game using highlights capture. Let's say it is a deathmatch in a first-person shooter game. The game session starts, and the game developer decides an important moment to be captured would be the 5th kill in the game. After the player plays through the game and achieves the 5th kill, an n-second highlight is triggered, which saves the video of the kill. The match can continue further with more highlights captured during the session. And after the match ends, the user is presented with a summary screen using Geforce Experience Overlay. In the screen, the user can choose to save the captured highlights, and he can also choose to share it on social media from the overlay. The Geforce Experience runtime comes packaged along with every game when it is shipped, if it supports Shadowplay highlights. The game communicates with Geforce Experience installed on your system using this runtime. And the in-game overlay is used for enabling or providing permissions for capturing highlights, viewing old saved highlights, etc. And Geforce Experience communicates with Shadowplay to capture these highlights. Now, let's look at the workflow from a developer's point of view. The pre-game section covers the tasks that are taken care of from initialization to a point before a session even starts. The first call would be a call to create the highlights capture instance. This call typically takes tens of milliseconds, but after this, the rest of the calls are serialized asynchronous calls to the GPU to perform various operations. The configuration of highlights is also a one-time call that happens during initialization, and all the highlight data remains persistent till the end of the game. The next step after configuring the highlights would be to request permission from the user. The highlight capture is only enabled once the user provides permission to capture them. A highlight can be identified uniquely with its ID. It also has some additional properties like the significance level of the highlight and also a tag which is used to uniquely classify a highlight. A tag could be something like, you can say that a highlight is a milestone, for example, or if it is an achievement, etc. The user also has the ability to turn off individual highlights. This gives the user flexibility to choose to capture only the highlights that he is interested in. This option can be found in Geforce Experience under that specific game's settings. After the configuration of highlight is complete and permissions to capture highlights have been granted, highlights are now ready to be captured. A highlight capture is triggered based on a game event. Highlights are also associated with groups. Groups make it easier for a developer to choose what highlights are going to be presented in the overlay at the end of a session. This is an example of a video highlight. In this case, the intention is to save a 3-second video. So what we would be providing for this is that we want to provide a start duration, a start time, and an end time for this. So we're specifying that using a start and end delta. So it is possible to capture videos of events that have happened even before the actual event has taken place because Shadowplay keeps recording automatically in the background. Finally, once the session is over, if any highlights were captured during the session, the user is presented with a summary dialog with all the highlights captured during that session. And once the gameplay is complete, the highlights instance needs to be released. Let's see what this looks like during gameplay. Highlights capture is only enabled once the user provides permission. So for the very first time the user enters a game session, he's requested for permission to capture the highlights, whether it be a video highlight or a screenshot. The permissions can always be revoked later by the user in the settings if he ever changes his mind. And then the user goes ahead and achieves a kill, and a highlight is recorded. And at the end of the session, he's presented with a summary of all the highlights that were captured during the session. NVIDIA has also worked on a Unity plugin, which consists of a C# scripting wrapper for the native Shadowplay highlights interface, which makes it really easy to integrate the feature into existing Unity projects. It is available to developers as a closed beta. Interested developers can approach the NVIDIA booth here at Unite to obtain access. Now, let's look at some code to demonstrate the usage of this plugin in a Unity development environment. We're looking here at a behavioral script in Unity. For the purpose of highlights, the start, update, and onDestroy functions are sufficient. The first step would be to import the highlights plugin into your Unity project. All the highlight functions are part of the highlights class under the NVIDIA namespace. The next step would be to initialize the highlights SDK. This is done at the very beginning. The create highlights call takes as arguments the scope which permissions need to be requested. The highlights permission is required to make any subsequent highlights related calls to the driver. The highlights record video and highlights record screenshot permissions are required for granting permission to the driver to capture video and screenshots. Then we provide an app name and create the highlights runtime with those arguments. The next step will be to define the highlights definition that are going to be used for the entire game. The configure highlights function after that takes an array of highlight definitions as an argument. In this example, we are defining two highlights. One records a level complete event, and the other records a triple kill. The highlight tag is used to classify the highlight. In this case, the first highlight is an achievement highlight. Highlights can also be given a significance level. The user default interest property states if the highlight needs to be enabled by default or not. Each highlight also has a name translation table to facilitate translation into different languages if the game is intended to be shipped with multi-language support. Once we have this array in place, we go ahead and make a call to configure the highlights. The next step after that would be to request the user for permissions. It is during this function call that the user is presented with the dialog to provide permissions for highlights capture in case permissions were not already provided earlier. This function call can happen during initialization or any time later during the main session in order to provide the screen to the user in a non-intrusive manner. With this, most of the initialization is complete. It is a design decision if you would like to open groups during initialization or during a session. Each group has a unique group ID and a translation table for multi-language support. At least one group has to be defined before any highlights can be captured at all. In the update function, we are using a helper function to read out any information, warnings, or error that are reported by the driver directly to the Unity log for ease of development. And then finally, when we want to quit the game, we release the highlights instance. Highlight captures are triggered based on in-game events. But for the sake of this demonstration, we will be using a switch statement. When an event takes place and we want to request a screenshot highlight, A screenshot highlight param structure is populated with the required highlights ID and the group ID to which we want to associate that particular highlight. The set screenshot highlight sends this information to the driver to capture the screenshot. Now, the same is true for the video highlight as well, except that for a video, we also need to provide a duration. And to do that, we make use of the start and end delta for the video capture. Then once the game session is complete, we would like to display all the captured highlights for review. For this, we first create an array of group views. Each group view identifies the group which needs to be retrieved. The highlights in that group can further be filtered down by its highlight significance levels and tag filters. Finally, this array group views is passed into open summary function, which displays the highlights using in-game overlay. And that's all there is to it. There are a few more functions that are outside the scope, but those are outside the scope of today's talk. There will be more information provided about these functions in the documentation, which will be provided along with the plugin. Now, I would like to show you all some footage from a game that is still in development and that is making use of this plugin. This is Escape from Tarkov, and it is a game that is being developed in Unity. In summary, we looked at a feature that helps users automatically capture their best gaming moments. The system is non-intrusive and only works once the user provides permissions. It causes no lag in gameplay, is easy to integrate with existing code, and makes sharing captured moments really simple. And with that, we're now open for questions.
So the last part of the system where the player has to select the clips which they want to capture, is there a way to make it less intrusive? Are you able to automate the system? If they say yes, then it will just automatically save all of the clips rather than throwing them into that every time, or then be a selection for them to be able to go to that rather than. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so as of now, the system is that, you just use that call to provide a summary. We currently don't have a way of fine-tuning that, so the user has to be able to decide whether he wants to save those clips or not. So, but he can choose which ones he wants to see in the summary in the first place. But he will be requested every time whether he wants to save them or not. Because there could be times that, you're playing through a game and you do get a lot of achievements, but you may be playing it a second time or something, and you might come across an event which is not worth saving and he does not want to like go ahead and save that, so he can just skip it. But saving is like a very quick process. So in case as soon as the summary shows up, he can just decide to save all of them. Okay, thank you.